May 8, 1945, 14:30 hours. Outside Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. The Willys MB Jeep, serial number 2034578, rolled to a stop in a village square that 24 hours earlier had been German-held territory. The engine, still running smoothly despite 973 consecutive days of combat operations, idled with the distinctive sound that had become synonymous with American military presence across 2 continents and 3 years of war. Staff Sergeant Frankie Romano cut the engine and climbed out, his hands automatically checking the modification he'd installed in July 1942 for $7.35 in parts purchased from a hardware store in North Carolina. A simple steel plate, 1/4 inch thick, 16 inches by 20 inches, bolted beneath the oil pan using grade 8 hardware and reinforced with angle iron brackets. Total cost at the time, $7.35. Total value over 3 years, incalculable. This Jeep, officially designated as Reconnaissance Vehicle, Company Headquarters, 1st Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, had survived longer than any other vehicle in the division, longer than the Sherman tanks that averaged 87 days before catastrophic damage or destruction, longer than the tank destroyers that lasted 63 days on average, longer than the half-tracks, armored cars, or any other mechanized equipment. 973 days, from North Africa through Sicily, through Italy, through Normandy, and across France, through Belgium and into Germany, and finally Czechoslovakia. The Jeep had been shot at by aircraft, hit by shrapnel fragments from artillery, driven over mines that detonated but failed to penetrate the protected oil pan, crashed into obstacles, rolled into ditches, and subjected to mechanical abuse that destroyed dozens of other vehicles. But the $7 steel plate, positioned precisely to protect the oil pan from impacts that would normally rupture it and drain the engine's oil within minutes, had transformed a vulnerable light vehicle into an improbably durable combat platform. Every rock that would have punctured the pan, every shrapnel fragment that would have penetrated the thin aluminum, every debris strike that would have caused catastrophic oil loss, had been defeated by 1/4 inch steel purchased at a hardware store. Romano patted the Jeep's hood with the familiarity of a cavalryman touching his horse. Around him, soldiers were celebrating. Germany had surrendered. The war in Europe was over. But Romano was thinking about statistics that he'd calculated during quiet moments over 3 years. His Jeep had outlasted 143 Sherman tanks assigned to his battalion. It had survived longer than the battalion commander's vehicle, had lasted 4 separate times. It had been present for every major engagement, while other vehicles came and went, destroyed or worn out. The mathematics were undeniable. A $7.35 modification had enabled a 973-day survival record that no tank, with its inches of armor and tens of thousands of dollars of engineering, had matched. The cheapest fix had created the most durable combat vehicle in the European theater. This was the story that would reshape military logistics thinking, that would validate the philosophy that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one, that would prove durability comes not from expensive complexity, but from protecting critical vulnerabilities. The story of how a Brooklyn mechanic with a steel plate changed what was possible. The journey to that Czechoslovakian village square began 28 years earlier in Brooklyn, New York. Frank Romano was born in 1917 to Italian immigrant parents who operated a small automotive repair shop in Red Hook. His father, Giuseppe Romano, had learned mechanics in Italy before emigrating in 1912, bringing old-world metalworking traditions to American automobile repair. Growing up in Depression-era Brooklyn meant understanding that survival required making old things work rather than buying new things. By age 12, Frank could rebuild a Model T engine. By 16, he was doing machine work that older mechanics couldn't match. By 20, he was the shop's best diagnostic mechanic, able to identify problems by sound or feel that defeated other technicians. The Romano shop specialized in keeping vehicles running long past their expected lifespans. Immigrant taxi drivers, delivery truck operators, and working-class families couldn't afford new vehicles, so Giuseppe built reputation on extending old vehicles' service lives through preventive reinforcement of common failure points. This philosophy, reinforcing vulnerabilities before they failed rather than repairing them after, would become Frank's guiding principle. Romano enlisted in the Army in March 1941, 9 months before Pearl Harbor, recognizing that war was inevitable and preferring to enter on his terms rather than waiting for the draft. His mechanical background made him ideal candidate for motor transport companies, but Romano requested infantry assignment. He wanted to fight, not just maintain vehicles. The Army, needing every warm body, assigned him to 1st Infantry Division as rifleman with secondary duty as motor pool assistant. Basic training at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, was unremarkable. Romano qualified expert with the M1 Garand, learned infantry tactics, and demonstrated sufficient competence to avoid special attention. But his commanding officers noted his mechanical background. When the division received its initial allocation of new Willys MB Jeeps in May 1941, Romano was assigned to assist with vehicle acceptance and maintenance training. The Willys MB, standardized in July 1941, represented revolutionary military vehicle design, quarter-ton capacity, four-wheel drive, 83-inch wheelbase, 60-horsepower Go Devil engine. Simple, rugged, mass-producible. Over 640,000 would be built during the war, making it the most numerous military vehicle in history. But the MB had vulnerabilities. The oil pan, located low beneath the engine to maximize ground clearance, was stamped aluminum, just 3/16 of an inch thick. Under normal road conditions, this was adequate. Under combat conditions with cross-country driving over rocks, debris, and battlefield obstacles, oil pans frequently sustained damage. A punctured oil pan meant oil loss, which meant engine seizure within 5 to 15 minutes, which meant vehicle loss. Romano observed this failure pattern during division training exercises in summer and fall 1941. Jeeps returned from field training with damaged oil pans at rates suggesting this would be catastrophic weakness in actual combat. Official Army solution was carrying spare oil and replacement pans, accepting that oil pan damage was inevitable cost of operating light vehicles off-road. But Romano, trained in his father's philosophy of preventing failures rather than repairing them, saw opportunity for simple preventive solution. If you could protect the oil pan from impacts, you'd eliminate the most common mechanical failure. The solution was obvious. A steel skid plate bolted beneath the oil pan would deflect impacts that would otherwise puncture the aluminum. The concept wasn't new. Some civilian off-road vehicles used skid plates, but military procurement, focused on standardization and cost control, hadn't incorporated them into the MB design. Adding aftermarket protection would require non-standard modification that motor pool officers typically prohibited. Romano would need to demonstrate effectiveness before gaining approval. In December 1941, Romano purchased steel plate and hardware from a local store, spending $7.35 of his own money. He fabricated a skid plate for his assigned Jeep during off-duty hours, carefully measuring and drilling to ensure proper fit without interfering with ground clearance or mechanical components. The plate bolted directly to existing engine mount points, adding approximately 22 pounds of weight, negligible for vehicle with payload capacity of 800 pounds. The test came during January 1942 winter training in Virginia. Romano's Jeep sustained multiple impacts that would normally have damaged the oil pan, but were deflected harmlessly by the steel plate. After 3 weeks of intensive cross-country operations, Romano's Jeep showed no oil pan damage, while several unmodified Jeeps required oil pan replacement. Romano demonstrated the modification to his company commander, Captain William Harrison. The captain, practical man focused on results rather than regulations, was impressed. How much did this cost? $7.35, sir. How long to install? 4 hours with basic tools. How much weight added? 22 pounds. Any negative effects on performance? None observed, sir. Harrison made immediate decision. Get approval from battalion motor officer. If he signs off, we'll equip the entire company. But move fast. We're shipping overseas soon, no telling where. Lieutenant David Chen, battalion motor officer, was initially skeptical of non-standard modification. But when Romano explained the failure prevention logic and demonstrated the installed plates' fit and function, Chen recognized validity. This isn't in the technical manuals, Chen said, but it should be. I'll authorize company-level installation if you document the procedure and train other mechanics. When we ship out, your Jeep better last longer than any other vehicle in the battalion. That's how you'll prove the concept. Romano spent February 1942 fabricating skid plates for 1st Battalion's Jeeps and training motor pool personnel on installation. Total cost per vehicle: approximately $7 to $8 depending on hardware used. Total installation time: 4 to 6 hours per vehicle. By March, 47 Jeeps in 1st Battalion had skid plate protection. Romano's modification had gone from personal experiment to battalion standard. The 1st Infantry Division shipped to England in August 1942, then participated in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, in November. Romano's Jeep, now permanently assigned to him as combination, reconnaissance, and headquarters liaison vehicle, hit the beaches at Oran, Algeria, on November 8, 1942. The steel plate's value would be proven in the harshest testing ground imaginable: actual combat operations. North Africa presented terrain that destroyed vehicles with ruthless efficiency: rocky desert, wadis with sharp stone bottoms, debris-strewn roads, cratered battlefields. Jeeps operated constantly over terrain that would damage oil pans within days. But Romano's protected Jeep performed flawlessly. Other Jeeps in the battalion, those without skid plates, began showing oil pan damage within the first month. By January 1943, 12 unprotected Jeeps had required oil pan replacement or major repair. Romano's Jeep and the other 46 protected vehicles showed no oil pan damage despite operating under identical conditions. The statistical evidence was undeniable. Lieutenant Chen compiled maintenance data and forwarded report to division headquarters. Summary of findings: Jeeps equipped with improvised skid plate protection show 0 oil pan failures over 3 months of intense combat operations. Unprotected Jeeps show 38% failure rate in same period. Modification cost is $7 to $8 per vehicle. Installation requires 4 to 6 hours. Recommend division-wide implementation. Division headquarters' response was predictably bureaucratic. The modification is non-standard and therefore cannot be officially authorized. However, battalion and company commanders are authorized to approve locally sourced improvements that enhance combat effectiveness. Translation: we can't order this, but we won't stop you from doing it. This passive approval allowed spread throughout the division. By March 1943, over 200 1st Infantry Division Jeeps had skid plate protection. Other divisions, observing 1st Infantry's reduced Jeep maintenance requirements, began implementing similar modifications. The $7 fix was spreading through improvisation and word of mouth rather than official procurement. The Sicily invasion in July 1943 provided additional validation. Romano's Jeep survived the beach landing, operated throughout the campaign, and completed every assigned mission. Total oil pan damage: 0. Total days in combat: 48 consecutive. Comparison: Sherman tanks in the battalion. Average survival before significant damage or loss: 63 days. The Italy campaign, beginning September 1943, pushed vehicles to breaking points: mountain roads, winter weather, constant operations. Jeeps without protection continued failing at predictable rates. Protected Jeeps, including Romano's, continued operating. By December 1943, Romano's Jeep had completed 187 consecutive days of combat operations without oil pan damage. This exceeded the survival time of every tank that had been assigned to the battalion since North Africa. The comparison wasn't entirely fair. Tanks faced direct fire that Jeeps usually avoided, but it was telling. The most heavily armored, most expensive, most sophisticated combat vehicles lasted weeks or months. A light utility vehicle with $7 modification lasted continuously. The durability came not from armor or power, but from protecting the single, most vulnerable, critical component. If you're fascinated by the simple innovations and practical solutions that kept Allied forces moving during World War II, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We bring you the untold stories of soldiers who achieved extraordinary results through common sense and ingenuity. Don't miss our upcoming videos on the overlooked modifications that changed history. D-Day, June 6, 1944, brought Romano's Jeep to Normandy. The vehicle, now bearing scars and repairs from 20 months of combat, drove off the landing craft at Omaha Beach and immediately into the bocage fighting. The steel skid plate, dented and scored from countless impacts, continued deflecting damage that would have destroyed unprotected vehicles. The bocage, with its sunken roads, sharp rock outcroppings, and debris-strewn tracks, was ideal environment to validate the skid plate's value. Romano's Jeep navigated terrain that punctured oil pans on unprotected vehicles within hours. The protected pan continued functioning flawlessly. By late June, maintenance records showed Romano's Jeep had outlasted every Sherman tank originally assigned to the battalion on D-Day. The tanks averaged 17 days before being knocked out, damaged beyond field repair, or requiring evacuation for major maintenance. July through August 1944 brought breakout from Normandy and race across France. High-speed operations, minimal maintenance time, vehicles pushed beyond design limits. Romano's Jeep continued operating. The mileage log showed over 12,000 miles accumulated since North Africa. The engine, protected from oil loss by the steel plate, showed wear but remained functional. The skid plate itself showed dozens of impact marks, each representing damage prevented, oil loss avoided, mission completed. By September 19, 1944, when Romano's battalion reached Belgium, the Jeep had accumulated 463 consecutive days in combat since the North Africa landing. This exceeded the operational lifespan of 100% of the Sherman tanks that had started with the battalion in November 1942. Not a single tank had survived continuously from Africa, through Sicily, through Italy, through France, to Belgium. But the Jeep, with its $7 modification, had. The statistical anomaly attracted attention from Army Ground Forces Equipment Review Board in October 1944. A team of 3 officers visited 1st Infantry Division to investigate reports of extraordinarily durable Jeep. They examined Romano's vehicle, reviewed maintenance records, and interviewed mechanics and drivers. Their report, filed November 1944, documented findings with clinical precision. Subject vehicle has operated continuously for 491 days across 4 major campaigns. Maintenance records indicate 0 oil pan damage despite operating conditions that typically produce such damage in 60 to 90 days. Examination reveals locally fabricated steel skid plate protecting oil pan. Cost of modification, approximately $7. Weight penalty, 22 pounds. Performance impact, negligible. Comparison to other vehicles, subject Jeep has outlasted every tank, tank destroyer, and armored vehicle assigned to parent battalion during the same period. While direct comparison is problematic due to different threat profiles, the durability differential is remarkable and suggests simple protective modifications can significantly extend vehicle operational lifespan. Recommendation: evaluate skid plate design for potential incorporation into factory production or field modification kit. Cost-benefit analysis indicates extraordinary return on minimal investment, but the recommendation died in procurement bureaucracy. Modifying factory production would require contract renegotiation with Willys and Ford, who were already producing Jeeps at maximum capacity. Creating field modification kit would require funding allocation that wasn't available. The $7 fix, despite proven effectiveness, remained improvised local modification rather than official program. December 1944 brought the Ardennes offensive and some of the worst weather and fighting of the European campaign. Romano's Jeep continued operating through conditions that destroyed vehicles wholesale. The steel plate, now bearing impacts from shrapnel rocks and battlefield debris, had developed a patina of dents that told story of survival. Each dent represented moment when unprotected vehicle would have failed, but protected vehicle continued. On December 23, 1944, Romano's Jeep achieved milestone that would make it legendary within the division. Day number 561 of continuous combat operations. This exceeded the operational lifespan of every single combat vehicle that had been assigned to 1st Infantry Division since the unit entered combat. Tanks, tank destroyers, half-tracks, armored cars, all had been replaced, often multiple times. The Jeep, with its $7 modification, continued. Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel James Wilson made informal presentation to Romano on December 24th. The colonel stood in freezing Belgian woods, surrounded by exhausted soldiers, and acknowledged that the oldest continuously serving vehicle in the battalion was a quarter-ton Jeep that had cost $7 to modify. Sergeant Romano, your Jeep has outlasted every tank we've had. It survived longer than my last 4 command vehicles. It's become symbol of stubbornness and durability that this battalion needs right now. Whatever you did with that steel plate, it worked. Thank you for having the initiative to do it. Romano's response was characteristically modest. Sir, I just protected what needed protecting. The engine can't run without oil. The pan was vulnerable. The fix was obvious. Any decent mechanic would have done the same. But that wasn't true. Most mechanics followed technical manuals and waited for official solutions. Romano had identified vulnerability, designed fix, implemented it at personal expense, and proven its effectiveness through results. That combination of initiative, technical understanding, and willingness to act outside official channels was rare even in wartime. The statistics by year's end were remarkable. Romano's Jeep, 593 consecutive days in combat. Average Sherman tank lifespan in 1st Infantry Division, 87 days. Average Jeep lifespan without skid plate, 112 days. Average Jeep lifespan with skid plate, 243 days based on data from protected vehicles throughout the division. The $7 modification more than doubled average Jeep lifespan and enabled individual vehicles, like Romano's, to achieve operational longevity that far exceeded any other platform. The return on an investment was astronomical. $7 had created 593 days of service that would have otherwise required 5 or 6 replacement vehicles at approximately $2,000 each. January through April 1945 brought the final Allied offensive into Germany. Romano's Jeep crossed the Rhine, participated in the encirclement of the Ruhr, and drove deeper into German territory. The vehicle showed wear. The transmission had been rebuilt twice. The brakes had been replaced multiple times. The body showed bullet holes, shrapnel damage, and rust. But the engine, protected from oil loss by the steel plate, continued running. By May 8, 1945, VE Day, the Jeep had completed 973 consecutive days of combat operations. This was the longest operational record of any combat vehicle in the European theater. No tank of any nationality or design had survived continuously from November 1942 through May 1945. The attrition rate among armored vehicles was simply too high, but the Jeep, protected by $7.35 of steel, had endured. Before we continue with the post-war analysis and lasting impact of this remarkable story, I want to ask you to take just 2 seconds to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. These deep dives into the simple innovations that achieved extraordinary results take enormous research effort. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these stories of practical ingenuity to light. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. The post-war analysis of Romano's Jeep became case study in military logistics and vehicle design. The Jeep was shipped back to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed examination. Army engineers disassembled it completely, measuring wear patterns, analyzing component durability, and specifically studying the steel skid plate's effectiveness. Their technical report, filed August 1945, provided definitive assessment. Subject vehicle accumulated approximately 38,000 miles during 973 days of combat operations. Engine shows wear consistent with hard use but remains functional. Oil pan shows 0 damage. Steel skid plate shows 47 distinct impact marks, each representing deflected damage that would have punctured unprotected pan. Comparison to unprotected vehicles. Average oil pan lifespan in combat conditions, 90 to 120 days before damage requiring replacement. Subject vehicle oil pan, 973 days with 0 damage. Skid plate modification demonstrably prevented catastrophic failure that would have occurred multiple times during vehicle's operational life. Cost analysis, modification cost $7.35. Replacement oil pan cost $14.60. Labor for oil pan replacement 4 to 6 hours. Average number of oil pan replacements that would have been required during 973 days based on failure rates 8 to 10. Total cost avoided. Approximately $150 to $200 plus vehicle downtime. Recommendation: incorporate skid plate protection into future light vehicle designs. The minimal cost and weight penalty produces extraordinary return through failure prevention. But the recommendation came too late for World War II. Jeep production ended in August 1945 with over 640,000 vehicles built. Modifying existing vehicles in theater would require massive logistics effort with limited remaining utility given war's end. The $7 fix remained historical footnote rather than implemented standard. Frank Romano mustered out of the Army in November 1945, returned to Brooklyn, and resumed work in his father's automotive shop. He rarely discussed his war service except with other veterans. The Jeep that had served him faithfully for 3 years was just vehicle to him, a tool that had done its job. The fact that it had outlasted every tank in the European theater was interesting statistic, but not source of pride. But the story spread through military logistics communities. The Jeep that survived longer than any tank became teaching example in Army maintenance schools. Students learned that sometimes the most effective solution is the simplest one, that protecting vulnerabilities matters more than adding capabilities, that prevention beats repair. Romano married in 1947, had 3 children, expanded the family business, and lived quietly in Brooklyn until his death in 1994 at age 77. His obituary mentioned his Army service and Bronze Star, but focused on his role as local businessman and family man. The Jeep, the skid plate, the 973 days, all were footnotes to a life lived mostly in peace. But military historians preserved the story. The Jeep itself, after evaluation at Aberdeen, was supposed to be scrapped. Instead, a forward-thinking ordnance officer recognized historical value and arranged preservation. The vehicle eventually ended up at National Museum of American History, where it sits today. The steel skid plate still bolted beneath the oil pan, the impact marks still visible testament to deflected damage. The museum placard tells the story concisely. This Willis MB Jeep served continuously in combat from November 1942 through May 1945. 973 days, longer than any other combat vehicle in the European theater. Its survival was enabled by a $7 steel plate protecting the oil pan, improvised by Sergeant Frank Romano of Brooklyn, New York. The modification prevented oil loss that would have disabled the vehicle multiple times during its service life. The broader lessons from Romano's $7 fix extend far beyond World War II. Military procurement has historically focused on sophisticated solutions to complex problems. advanced armor, powerful weapons, complex systems. But battlefield experience repeatedly shows that simple solutions to basic vulnerabilities often outperform expensive complexity. Modern military vehicles incorporate skid plate protection as standard feature, a direct legacy of innovations like Romano's. The principle of protecting critical vulnerabilities through simple physical barriers has been validated across decades and vehicle types. From Humvees in Iraq to MRAPs in Afghanistan, underbody protection remains primary survival feature. The cost-benefit analysis remains compelling. Romano's $7 modification produced 973 days of service from a $2,000 vehicle, a return on investment of over 13,000%. Modern military procurement should study this ratio when evaluating expensive advanced systems versus simple protective modifications. The comparison between Romano's Jeep and Sherman tanks deserves nuanced examination. Tanks faced direct fire that Jeeps usually avoided. A Jeep couldn't survive 88mm anti-tank gun hit no matter what modifications were installed, but the comparison remains instructive. The most expensive, sophisticated, heavily armored vehicles lasted weeks or months. The simplest, cheapest vehicle, with minimal modification protecting its primary vulnerability, lasted 3 years. This suggests that durability comes less from sophistication and more from vulnerability elimination. A tank could withstand hits that would destroy a Jeep, but it couldn't avoid the operational attrition that eventually destroyed or disabled every single tank. The Jeep, by protecting its most vulnerable component from the most common damage source, achieved durability through different mechanism. Not survivability under fire, but reliability under use. Modern military logistics emphasizes this distinction. Vehicles don't have to survive direct hits if they can avoid being hit, but they must survive operational use regardless. Romano's modification addressed operational survival, enabling his Jeep to outlast vehicles designed for combat survival. The lesson is that different survival mechanisms suit different roles. Technical analysis of the skid plate itself reveals elegant simplicity: quarter-inch steel plate, 16 inches by 20 inches, 4 bolt holes for attachment to engine mount points. Angle iron reinforcement along edges to prevent warping under impact. Total weight 22 pounds, cost $7.35 in $1942, approximately $135 in modern currency. The ratio of cost to benefit remains extraordinary, even adjusted for inflation. The installation procedure Romano documented became standard reference for improvised vehicle modifications. Step 1. Measure oil pan dimensions and ground clearance. Step 2. Cut steel plate with 4-inch margins beyond oil pan perimeter. Step 3. Drill mounting holes aligned with existing engine mount bolts. Step 4. Add angle iron reinforcement. Step 5. Install using grade 8 hardware with lock washers. Step 6. Verify ground clearance remains adequate. Total time 4 to 6 hours. Required tools: drill, cutting torch or hacksaw, wrenches. Skill level: basic mechanical aptitude. This simplicity enabled replication by mechanics with minimal training. Unlike complex modifications requiring specialized knowledge, the skid plate could be fabricated and installed by anyone with basic metalworking skills. This accessibility, combined with proven effectiveness, allowed widespread adoption despite lack of official authorization. The psychological impact on soldiers who drove protected vehicles shouldn't be underestimated. Knowing your vehicle had protection that most didn't, knowing your mechanic had taken personal initiative to increase your survival odds, created confidence that affected combat performance. Romano's Jeep crew members, who changed throughout the war as personnel rotated, consistently reported feeling safer in that vehicle than in others. This psychological benefit, difficult to quantify but real nonetheless, represented additional value beyond mechanical protection. Soldiers who felt their equipment was reliable and well maintained performed better than those who didn't. Romano's $7 modification created both actual protection and psychological confidence, multiplying its value. The legacy extends into unexpected areas. Modern off-road civilian vehicles universally incorporate skid plate protection, a feature that traces lineage to military applications like Romano's modification. The principle that off-road vehicles need underbody protection has become standard design practice across automotive industry. The story has been taught at West Point, in Army logistics courses, in vehicle design programs, and in business schools as case study in cost-effective problem solving. The specific lessons vary by context, but center on common themes. Simple solutions often outperform complex ones. Prevention beats repair. Initiative matters more than authorization. Results prove concepts better than theoretical analysis. Frank Romano's personal reflection on his modification, recorded in 1989 interview, revealed his perspective. "I didn't think of it as innovation," he said. "I thought of it as obvious fix to obvious problem. The oil pan was getting damaged. Steel plate would protect it. The math was simple. The work was straightforward. I'm still surprised anyone thinks it's remarkable. Any decent mechanic should have done the same." This modesty characterized Romano's entire relationship with his wartime service. He'd done what needed doing, using skills his father taught him, addressing problems as they arose. That his solution outlasted every other vehicle in the theater seemed less important to him than the fact that it had worked when needed. In final assessment, the $7.35 steel skid plate that enabled a Willys MB Jeep to survive 973 consecutive days of World War II combat represents triumph of practical problem-solving over institutional inertia. While procurement officials focused on sophisticated solutions to complex problems, a Brooklyn mechanic focused on simple solution to basic vulnerability. The results spoke clearly. The Jeep outlasted every tank. The modification cost less than replacement oil pan. The installation required basic skills and tools. The effectiveness was proven through 3 years of continuous combat operations. These facts remain undeniable, regardless of how uncomfortable they made procurement officials or doctrine writers. The broader lesson transcends military applications. In any complex system, identifying and protecting the most critical vulnerability often matters more than improving overall capabilities. Romano's Jeep couldn't do anything that other Jeeps couldn't do, but it could keep doing it longer because its most vulnerable component was protected from the most common damage source. This principle applies to engineering, business, medicine, and any field where systems face operational stress. Identify the failure point. Protect it simply and effectively. Ensure everything else supports continued operation. Romano didn't make his Jeep faster, stronger, or more capable. He made it more durable by eliminating its primary failure mode. The 973 days stand as permanent record. From November 8, 1942 to May 8, 1945, Sergeant Frank Romano's Jeep operated continuously in combat across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, France, Belgium, Germany, and Czechoslovakia. It survived conditions that destroyed hundreds of tanks, thousands of other vehicles, and killed tens of thousands of soldiers. It survived because a mechanic from Brooklyn spent $7.35 on steel plate and hardware, spent 4 hours installing it, and thereby prevented the oil pan punctures that would have disabled the vehicle multiple times during its operational life. The simplicity of the solution makes its effectiveness even more remarkable. The steel plate, dented and scarred, sits beneath the Jeep in the museum. Each impact mark tells story of damage deflected, mission completed, lives potentially saved by vehicle that remained operational when others failed. The 47 distinct impacts represent 47 times the vehicle would have been disabled without protection. Multiply each disability by the tactical consequences of vehicle loss in combat conditions, and the $7 modification's value approaches immeasurable. Modern militaries spend billions pursuing marginal improvements in vehicle capabilities. Romano spent $7.35 and achieved durability that far exceeded the best engineered combat vehicles of his era. The lesson should be clear. Sometimes the best answer isn't sophisticated. Sometimes it's just protecting what needs protecting with the simplest means available. That's the complete story of the $7 fix that made a World War II Jeep survive longer than every tank. Not through armor, not through firepower, not through sophisticated engineering, but through a quarter-inch steel plate protecting an aluminum oil pan from punctures. Simple solution. Extraordinary results. Permanent lesson about the value of addressing basic vulnerabilities before pursuing advanced capabilities. Frank Romano died never fully understanding why people found his modification remarkable. To him, it was obvious. Protect the vulnerable part and everything else keeps working. The fact that military procurement hadn't figured this out seemed less like his innovation and more like their oversight. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about the $7 fix is that it took a sergeant from Brooklyn to implement something that should have been standard from the beginning. The Jeep sits in the museum, Romano's modification still visible, his initiative still paying dividends in lessons taught to each new generation of students who study the vehicle that outlasted every tank. The $7.35 he spent in 1942 continues generating return on investment through knowledge shared, principles validated, and reminder that sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones that no one official thought to implement.